The galaxy never thought humanity would matter. For centuries, empires rose and fell across the stars, each convinced they had reached the peak of power. Vast fleets of steel, plasma cannons that could melt worlds, war machines that blotted out suns, these were the tools of those who thought themselves eternal. To them, humanity was nothing but a small, restless species on the edge of known space. Too young, too reckless, too fragile to ever be a threat. They underestimated us. The first whispers began in the border systems, quiet stories carried by traders who swore they saw human ships moving where none should exist. These weren't the outdated, jury-rigged vessels the galaxy had come to expect from Earth's people. No. These were something else, sleek, silent shapes gliding in black void, their drives unlike anything known. At first, no one believed the rumors. What could humanity possibly have created that the great empires had not? But the stories kept spreading, each more unsettling than the last. Then came the first wreck. A veiled Dominion battleship, something that had ruled its sector unchallenged for decades, was found adrift. No crew. No signals. Hull scarred in ways no plasma or laser weapon could explain. It was as if the metal had been torn apart at the level of atoms themselves. The Dominion kept the truth hidden, but word has a way of escaping. Soon, every admiral and warlord was whispering the same words with unease. Humanity had unleashed antimatter. No empire was ready. For them, antimatter was a theory, a weapon too unstable, too dangerous, too costly to ever be scaled beyond small research labs. Fleets depended on fusion, on plasma, on controlled bursts of starfire. Antimatter was a dream no one dared chase. Humanity did not just chase it, they harnessed it, chained it, and built an entire fleet powered by it. The idea alone was terrifying. If even a single warhead detonated at close range, it could erase entire capital ships, wipe out fleets in seconds. And now there were rumors of not just bombs but reactors, drives, and weapons built entirely around antimatter. The galaxy tried to laugh it off. Humanity, with their stubborn pride, had always been good at making things sound larger than they were. Surely they couldn't have built such a fleet. Surely it was exaggeration. Surely it was another human trick, a bluff meant to buy them time. But the laughter ended the moment the first empire tested them. It was the Thauric Combine, arrogant and cruel, that moved first. They saw humanity's rising influence as a disease to be crushed early. They assembled a fleet the size of a small moon, thousands of ships, carriers, destroyers, entire flotillas bristling with weapons. They moved toward human space with the confidence of predators, already celebrating the easy victory to come. The galaxy watched, some with pity, some with curiosity, and many with hunger for human territories they assumed would soon be left undefended. But what they saw instead changed everything. When the Thauric Armada entered the Soul border, the humans were waiting. Not with scattered frigates or outdated cruisers, but with a fleet that moved like a living thing. Black ships glided out of the void, their surfaces drinking in the light of distant suns. There were no glowing engines, no heat signatures to track. Just silence. Just shadows. And then the first antimatter volley was fired. Observers still argue about what happened in those first seconds. Some say the void itself tore open. Others say the Thauric ships simply ceased to exist. What is certain is that hundreds of vessels were annihilated instantly, their hulls shredded into nothingness by the unleashed fury of antimatter detonations. Space lit up in a storm of destruction the galaxy had never seen before. Weapons that had once been considered God's fire were nothing compared to this. Panic spread through the Combine fleet. Their commanders issued orders, their gunners fired every weapon they had, but it was like trying to claw at the night sky. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision, striking and vanishing, always one step ahead. Whole wings of destroyers disappeared in seconds. Carriers erupted in white silence. And when the humans finally withdrew, they left nothing behind but drifting debris and a silence that chilled even the farthest observers. The message was clear. Humanity had entered the game. And the rules would never be the same. Every empire felt the tremor of that day. The mighty powers who once ignored Earth now scrambled to reassess. Some whispered of alliances, others plotted wars, but none could shake the image of the combined fleet being erased as if it had never been. Entire sectors began to wonder if humanity had been hiding this technology all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. Fear spread faster than any fleet could travel. But for the humans, this was only the beginning. Behind closed doors, human leaders debated what came next. Antimatter had given them a weapon that no one else possessed, but it also painted a target on their species. Every empire in the galaxy now saw Earth not as a curiosity but as a threat. Some would come seeking to steal their technology. Others would come to crush them before their power grew further. Humanity had revealed its hand, and there was no turning back. Yet in the hearts of the crews who manned those silent black ships, there was no fear. They were not conquerors, not yet. They were survivors who had clawed their way out of fragility and into strength. Every antimatter drive, every warhead, every ship had been born out of desperation, out of the need to protect their home from the predators who circled them. For the first time in history, humanity did not feel small. They looked out into the vast ocean of stars and saw not endless enemies, but endless possibilities. Still, even as hope grew, so did the shadows. Strange signals began to appear at the edges of human-controlled space. Unidentified fleets moving in silence. Probes vanishing without trace. Whispers of ancient empires stirring, powers that had slumbered for ages, now awakened by the shockwave of humanity's rise. Some claimed the humans had gone too far, had broken a balance that had lasted for millennia. Others swore the galaxy would unite, not in rivalry but in fear, to end humanity before their antimatter fleets could reshape everything. The crews of the human ships didn't know all of this. Not yet. But they could feel it. Every mission carried the weight of history. Every battle might be the one that decided the future of their species. And as their black fleets drifted through the stars, silent and watchful, they knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. And now no empire would ever survive first contact with their antimatter fleet. But in the cold silence of deep space, where light took years to travel and shadows seemed alive, there were questions that even the strongest fleet could not answer. Who was truly watching them? Who had already begun to prepare for the war to come? And what price would humanity pay for daring to step beyond the limits that others feared to cross? The answer was out there waiting. And humanity was about to discover it. The wreckage of the Thauric fleet still drifted at the edge of Soul's reach, silent reminders of what had happened when arrogance met something it could not understand. Scavengers avoided the sight. Even the boldest traders steered clear, as if the twisted metal carried a curse. But humanity did not celebrate. There were no parades, no songs of triumph. Instead, there was only a heavy silence, the weight of knowing the galaxy had now truly seen them. In command halls buried beneath Earth's surface, leaders argued over what they had unleashed. The antimatter fleet had been humanity's greatest gamble. Born not from ambition but from necessity, it was never meant to be revealed so soon. The early designs had been whispers of desperate scientists and engineers who refused to accept that humanity would always remain prey. When resources were scarce, when borders were threatened, when the old powers laughed at them, humans turned inward and built in secret. It started small. An engine core the size of a crate, humming with unstable energy that could vaporize an entire facility if mishandled. A single test weapon, hidden in the asteroid belts, detonated in silence with a brilliance that left even its makers shaken. Most thought the project would collapse under its own danger. But failure was something humanity had always endured. And each failure taught them something new. Piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice, they built what no other empire dared attempt. The first crews who boarded the antimatter ships were not volunteers in the normal sense. They were chosen for their resolve, their ability to face death with steady hands. They were soldiers, engineers, and explorers who understood what was at stake. Some had lost families to raids by empires that saw Earth as nothing but a backwater to exploit. Some carried scars from battles where human fleets had been crushed in minutes. They stepped aboard knowing they might not come back, but they did it because someone had to. To outsiders, humanity's rise looked sudden, impossible. But inside, every ship carried years of blood and sweat. The fleet was not just a weapon. It was the sum of their history. And yet, the danger was far from over. The Combine's defeat had shocked the galaxy, but it had also painted a mark on humanity larger than ever. The surviving empires held secret meetings, whispering about how to respond. Some planned to unite against the humans, pooling their strength before the antimatter fleet grew even larger. Others debated whether humanity could be bargained with, bought, or lured into alliances. A few, the oldest and most cunning empires, remained silent. They did not rush. They simply watched, waiting for humanity to reveal more. The humans could sense it too. Out in the dark between stars, their crews felt the unease of hunters who knew other predators were circling. Sometimes they picked up faint signals, shadows of fleets moving just beyond their scanners. Sometimes probes vanished as if swallowed by the void. There were even rumors among the crews of strange shapes drifting in the distance, silent forms that never showed up on instruments. Some dismissed them as nerves. Others weren't so sure. A captain of one of the new ships once told his crew, "The real war hasn't begun yet." What we fought at Sol was only the first knock on the door. The question is, who's knocking back? That unease grew stronger with each passing week. Earth itself became a fortress. Defense grids stretched across orbit, orbital stations were expanded, and antimatter research doubled in pace. Factories deep underground worked day and night, guarded more fiercely than any palace. Every civilian knew what had happened at Sol, though no official broadcast ever explained it in detail. They only knew one thing: humanity was no longer ignored. And that was both their greatest victory and their greatest danger. Among the fleet, bonds formed that went deeper than orders. Crews lived knowing every mission could be their last. They trained together, ate together, endured the silence of space together. When one ship did not return from a patrol, the grief was quiet but sharp, carried by every crew member across the fleet. They told themselves they were defending their home, that their sacrifices meant something. But in the quiet hours, doubts gnawed at them. Were they building a shield, or a weapon that would doom them all? Beyond human space, the rumors spread like fire. In distant marketplaces, traders told wild tales of ships that erased whole armadas with a single strike. Some swore humanity had made a pact with something ancient, something beyond the known powers. Others claimed Earth had stumbled upon forbidden technology buried in the ruins of dead civilizations. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying: it was human determination that built those ships, human stubbornness that made them work. But the galaxy preferred stories of dark bargains, because the idea of humanity alone reaching such power was harder to accept. The suspense only deepened when the first strange encounter occurred. A human patrol ship disappeared in deep space, not near any known empire's territory. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence. At first, command dismissed it as mechanical failure. But then another vanished. And another. Soon whispers spread that someone, or something, was hunting the hunters. Crews began to notice patterns. The missing ships had all been traveling near uncharted regions, sectors where old star maps showed warnings written in dead languages. Long ago, explorers had avoided those routes, marking them as cursed or unstable. Now humanity's fleets were pressing into those same regions without hesitation, and something out there was watching. Back on Earth, leaders debated what to do. Some argued for pulling the fleet closer to home, focusing on defense. Others demanded they push forward, to strike before the other empires gathered strength. And beneath it all was a quieter fear: the antimatter fleet might not be enough. For every weapon humanity built, the galaxy had always found a countermeasure. What if this time was no different? What if the mystery fleets and vanishing patrols were signs that someone already knew how to dismantle everything they had built? The crews did not have answers, only resolve. Each time they left dock, they knew the risks. They strapped into their stations with steady hands, eyes fixed on the stars, carrying the weight of humanity's survival with them. Their ships were powerful, yes, but they were still human, still fragile beneath the black. They felt the same fears anyone would: the fear of not returning, the fear of failing their people, the fear of being remembered only as another wreck drifting in silence. And yet they went anyway. Because if humanity stopped moving, if they hesitated even once, the galaxy would swallow them whole. And so the black fleets pressed deeper, their shadows stretching into places where no one dared go. They moved like phantoms, their drives leaving no trace, their weapons waiting in silence. The galaxy held its breath, watching. Every empire waited for the next spark, the next battle, the next revelation. Humanity had shown their strength, but the true test had not yet arrived. Somewhere in the dark, something was waiting for them. And when humanity found it, the real story would begin. The silence in human space grew heavier with every passing week. Fleets no longer vanished quietly. Now entire sectors reported strange readings, signals that flickered in and out, like whispers in the dark. Crews spoke in hushed tones of shapes glimpsed on long-range scanners, things that appeared for only a second before slipping away. The official reports called them anomalies. The people called them hunters. Still, humanity pushed forward. The antimatter fleet expanded, black ships rolling off hidden shipyards like ghosts being born. Each vessel carried more firepower than any empire had ever dared to imagine. Each crew felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They were the first line, the shield of Earth, the ones who would stand when no one else would. And yet, in their quiet moments, they knew the truth: they were being watched. Deep space patrols started sending back fragments. A distorted signal, too precise to be natural. A pattern in the static like coded pulses. A transmission that repeated the same phrase in an unknown tongue before cutting off. At first, command dismissed it as coincidence. But then the fragments grew more frequent. Some seemed to come from right on the edge of human-controlled space. Others echoed from far beyond, from regions the maps marked as dead. It felt less like random noise and more like someone knocking at the door. Admirals debated in tense chambers. Was it another empire, testing humanity's strength before committing to war? Or something older, something the empires themselves feared to speak of? The Thauric Combine had fallen, but in their ruins whispers stirred of powers far greater. Empires that had survived for millennia had their own buried legends, warnings etched into forgotten star charts. And now humanity's rise had shaken those legends awake. The fleet moved outward step by careful step. Black ships spread through the void, their hulls reflecting no light, their engines leaving no trail. Every crew felt the tension, the sense that each jump might carry them straight into the unknown. Sleep was short, nerves were stretched, and yet their resolve hardened. For the first time humanity was not hiding. They were daring the galaxy to answer. Then came the first true sign. A patrol near the border picked up readings of a fleet unlike any recorded before. No transponders, no recognizable designs. The ships moved in silence, drifting as if waiting. When hailed, there was no response. When scanned, they seemed to blur, their shapes shifting as if they did not belong fully in the same space. The patrol sent its findings back, just fragments, bursts of static, and one final message: they see us. Moments later, the patrol was gone. No wreckage. No distress call. Only silence. Panic rippled through the command halls. This was no ordinary empire. This was something else. Some said it was an ancient power that had watched the galaxy from the shadows. Others believed it was a coalition of empires, united in secret to strike down humanity before it grew too strong. Whatever it was, the sense of inevitability grew. The collision was coming. Back on Earth, people lived with a quiet dread. They looked to the sky, knowing their future hung on ships they would never see. Families sent their sons and daughters into the fleet with pride and fear tangled together. No one spoke of victory yet. They only spoke of survival. The fleet prepared. Weapons were armed, antimatter warheads secured, every system checked twice, then 3 times. Crews whispered to each other in the silence of their bunks, admitting their fears only in the dark. They were brave, but they were still human. They longed for home, for warmth, for the chance to live normal lives again. And yet, when the alarms sounded, they would rise without hesitation. The signals grew stronger. Fleets massed in the dark, their movements impossible to track. Human scouts vanished before they could return. In the void, tension built like a storm held at bay by fragile walls. Everyone felt it. Every admiral, every captain, every crew member knew the next battle would decide more than territory or pride. It would decide if humanity had truly earned its place among the stars, or if their rise would end as suddenly as it began. And then the Watchers moved. The first detection came from the outer rim. Hundreds of ships, perhaps thousands, emerging from the void with precision. Their designs were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, smooth, curved, almost alive. They advanced without sending a single message, without firing a single shot. Just silence and steady movement, pressing closer to human space. Orders went out. The antimatter fleet assembled. Black ships emerged from hidden docks, engines humming in silence. Crews strapped into their stations, faces pale but determined. They knew what was coming. They knew the galaxy was watching. Every empire, every world, every rival waited to see if humanity would stand or break. The fleets faced each other across the void. Distance shrank with each passing hour. Sensors screamed with energy readings no one understood. Human captains stared at their displays, seeing ships blur and shimmer as if they were phantoms. Some swore they felt something, a pressure, a weight, as if the enemy fleet wasn't just approaching physically but pressing into their very thoughts. Tension thickened. Weapons armed. Fingers hovered over controls. Every breath felt heavy. The silence before the storm stretched, unbearable, fragile. The galaxy had seen humanity strike before. They had seen the power of antimatter unleashed. But this was different. This was not a battle for pride or defiance. This was survival itself. Humanity's fleets drifted forward, their black hulls reflecting nothing, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire species. And then, in the final moments before the clash, the enemy fleet shifted. Their ships unfolded like wings of shadow, spreading wide, surrounding human space like a closing fist. Communications lit up with frantic signals, officers shouting over one another, scanners overloaded with impossible readings. The void itself seemed to tremble. Every heart in the human fleet pounded with the same thought. This was it. The collision was inevitable. Antimatter warheads were primed. Engines roared in silence. Crews braced for what was about to come. And in that heartbeat before history shattered, humanity stared into the abyss, and waited for it to blink. The fleets hung in the dark, the distance between them shrinking with each breath. Humanity's black ships stood ready, antimatter weapons locked, crews bracing for the storm. Across from them, the unknown armada spread wide like a shadow swallowing the stars. Silence pressed on every mind, heavier than steel. This was supposed to be the moment the war began, the clash the galaxy had been waiting for. But instead of opening fire, the enemy did something no one expected. They stopped. The vast fleet froze in place as if holding its breath. Then, without warning, a signal cut through every channel at once. It wasn't language in any human sense, it was vibration, a pulse that rattled through the bones of every crew member. Some clutched their heads, others gasped as the sound seemed to echo inside their minds. Words formed out of the noise, not heard with ears but felt like an intrusion. Asterisk, we have waited. We warned them. You woke us. Asterisk. Panic rippled through the ships. Officers shouted to shut the signal out, but it seeped through every barrier, every wall. Humanity's crews had faced fire and death, but this was different. This was something they couldn't fight with weapons. And then, as quickly as it began, the message ended. The silence returned, but it was not the same silence. Now it felt alive, watching, judging. Commanders scrambled to regain order, voices cracking as they issued orders to ready weapons. But before the fleet could fire, the enemy moved again, not forward but deeper into formation, opening a corridor straight into the heart of their armada. It was as if they were inviting humanity in. Every instinct screamed it was a trap. Yet holding back was just as dangerous. The galaxy was watching, and hesitation would be seen as weakness. The admirals knew they had no choice. The Black Fleet pushed forward, engines humming, weapons armed. Crews swallowed their fear and gripped their stations tighter. But as they entered the corridor, the second twist revealed itself. Sensors lit up with impossible readings, structures, massive and ancient, hidden inside the enemy formation. They weren't ships. They were something else, drifting like monuments in the void. Each one pulsed with energy that made antimatter look like a candle flame. Humanity had thought they were facing a fleet. In truth, they were staring at a weapon older than any empire, something the galaxy had chosen to bury and forget. The realization hit like cold fire. This wasn't just another rival power trying to crush them. This was something greater, something that had been waiting beyond the edge of memory. And now it had awakened, not because of human ambition, but because humanity's rise had broken the balance that kept it asleep. Crews whispered to each other, voices tight with fear. Some swore they felt the ancient structures watching them like eyes behind stone. Others swore they could hear faint whispers in the static, fragments of forgotten warnings. Every second stretched like an eternity. Back on Earth, Command tried to make sense of the data pouring in. Screens flickered with energy readings that defied science, projections that suggested the enemy's power could erase entire systems in moments. Leaders who had once argued over politics now sat in silence, faces pale as they realized the truth. Humanity had not just challenged the galaxy's empires. They had awakened the galaxy's nightmares. And still the enemy did not fire. They waited, letting the Black Fleet push deeper, letting the tension strangle every breath. It was not the behavior of conquerors. It was something worse. It was the behavior of predators who had no need to rush. Admirals debated whether to retreat, but the crews knew retreat was no longer possible. The fleet was surrounded, locked in the grip of something too vast to outrun. Their only path was forward into the jaws of whatever awaited them. For the first time since their rise, doubt spread like fire through humanity's ranks. Antimatter had given them power unlike anything before, but staring at those colossal structures, they felt small again. Crews who had faced death without blinking now found themselves whispering prayers, clutching photos of loved ones, forcing themselves to remember what they were fighting for. The galaxy watched with bated breath. Empires that had feared humanity now felt their own fear shift toward the unknown. For centuries they had hidden these legends, burying them under lies and silence. Now humanity had dragged them back into the light. And every empire knew the truth: they would be next. In the black silence, humanity's fleet tightened formation. Antimatter warheads armed. Engines roared, ready to carry them into the fire. Hearts pounded in unison, every crew member bound by the same resolve. If they were to fall, they would fall fighting. The enemy ships shifted once more, closing the corridor behind them. The trap had snapped shut. And then, one by one, the ancient structures began to stir, their surfaces glowing with light older than human history. The void trembled and humanity's crews realized the first battle had never been against empires. The true war was only beginning. And in that moment, with the galaxy watching, with every heart beating in dread and defiance, the Antimatter fleet faced the impossible choice: fire and risk awakening something even worse, or hold and risk being swallowed whole. The abyss leaned closer, waiting for humanity's answer. The ancient structures pulsed with growing light, their vast shapes rising like giants in the dark. Every screen on the human ships screamed with warnings, energy readings climbing so high that the numbers lost meaning. Crews braced at their stations, sweat shining on their faces, knowing they were seconds away from being torn apart. The admirals gave no speeches, no last words. The order was simple, heavy, and final: fire everything. The Antimatter fleet moved as one. Black ships unleashed their fury, volleys of warheads streaking forward, engines burning white against the endless void. The darkness lit up as antimatter detonations erupted, storms of raw destruction blooming in silence. Waves of energy tore through enemy ships, ripping them apart at the molecular level, just as they had done to the Thauric Combine. The crews who fired felt the familiar jolt of triumph, the reassurance that their weapons still worked, that their strength was real. But then the light cleared. The fleet saw what still remained. The enemy ships had been destroyed, yes, but the ancient structures endured. Antimatter blasts washed over them like waves against stone, leaving only scars that glowed faintly before fading away. The energy they released only seemed to feed the structures, their pulsing light growing brighter, stronger, hungrier. The crews stared in disbelief, hearts sinking as they realized their greatest weapon was not enough. And then the structure struck back. Beams of light lashed out, not like plasma or lasers but something far worse: streams of energy that bent space itself, twisting human ships out of formation. A destroyer vanished in a flash of impossible distortion, gone without a trace. Another ship screamed over comms as its hull warped inward like paper. Crews watched their comrades vanish in seconds, knowing it could be them next. The fleet held the line. Panic surged, but training took over. Antimatter was hurled again and again, detonations shaking the void, the crews fighting with everything they had. Every captain knew there was no retreat, no safe harbor to run to. If Earth was to survive, it would be here in this battle. Families, homes, all of humanity depended on them. And so, even as their ships cracked and burned, they pressed forward. One by one, their sacrifices opened a path. Small cracks formed in the glow of the structures, faint fractures that shimmered under the strain of constant bombardment. It wasn't enough yet, but it was something. Crews roared with renewed determination, firing faster, burning brighter. They were breaking through. But the cost was unbearable. Ships vanished in waves of light. Pilots screamed as their vessels twisted into nothingness. The fleet was bleeding, but it refused to fall. And in the heart of the storm, a single revelation came. The structures weren't just weapons. They were prisons. Fragments of the strange signals finally decoded, lines of forgotten language that made sense too late. Asterisk, we warned them. They buried us. Do not open the gates. Asterisk, the enemy fleets hadn't been awakening the structures. They had been guarding them, holding back what should never be released. Humanity hadn't stumbled into a trap. They had broken the chains. The truth struck harder than any beam. Humanity's rise, their defiance, their power, it had drawn attention not only from empires, but from what had been sealed away. The ancient guardians had been watching, waiting, holding the line across millennia. And now those guardians were gone, swept aside by antimatter fire. Humanity stood alone before the prisoners. The admirals knew it was too late to turn back. The structures had awakened, and their power was rising beyond control. The only choice was to strike harder than ever before, to gamble everything on breaking them before whatever was inside broke free. The order went out, trembling but clear. Asterisk, all ships, full release. Every warhead. Now, asterisk. The antimatter fleet obeyed. Wave after wave of warheads erupted, filling the void with storms brighter than suns. Ships emptied their magazines, crews knowing this was their final act. The ancient structures cracked, their glowing shells splitting apart in shards of impossible metal. Light poured out, blinding, burning, shaking the stars themselves. And then one by one they shattered. Silence followed. The battlefield was a graveyard of wreckage, human ships adrift, half of the fleet gone. But the ancient giants were broken, their power extinguished. Crews slumped in exhaustion, eyes wet with relief and grief. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had survived. But the silence did not last. From the ruins of the shattered structures, something stirred. Not ships. Not weapons. Something older, darker, freer. Shadows spread through the void, shapes that defied form, moving with impossible speed. The guardians had been prisons, but now the prisoners were loose. Every human heart clenched at once. Victory had come, but at a price they could not yet measure. They had destroyed the unbreakable. They had proven their strength. But in doing so, they had unleashed what the galaxy had feared for thousands of years. And as the wreckage drifted, as survivors whispered to each other in disbelief, a final message cut through the silence. Not from the enemy, not from the ruins, but from the shadows themselves. A voice, vast and cold, filling every ship at once. Asterisk, you are the first to break the chains. And now humanity will lead the war that never ends. Asterisk. The crews froze. Admirals stared in silence. Earth waited for answers that would never come. The antimatter fleet had won the battle. But in that victory they had awakened the true war. The war was finally over, though the word felt too small to contain what had just happened. The battlefield stretched across light years, yet in the silence that followed, it felt as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Humanity's antimatter fleet had delivered its final strike, a blow so decisive that no empire could deny the truth anymore. The once mighty coalitions, the great warlords, the dynasties that had believed themselves eternal, all had fallen before the fire that humanity unleashed. But in that victory there was no celebration, only the heavy weight of survival. Ships drifted through the void, damaged but alive. The human fleet, scarred and dim, carried the last echoes of battle in its hulls. The crews were exhausted, hollow-eyed, their voices tired when they spoke over the comms. They had seen too much, lost too many, and even as they breathed easier knowing the war had ended, there was no joy. There was relief, yes, and pride, but also sorrow. Victory had a cost and they all felt it. In the quiet of that aftermath, the universe itself seemed changed. Entire empires had been erased in hours, civilizations scattered, and star systems left with nothing but ruins. The galaxy would never forget the sight of antimatter storms ripping through fleets that once believed themselves untouchable. The memory would echo through generations. Humanity had not just fought a war, they had rewritten what war meant. Yet even in that silence, unease lingered. For all their power, for all the destruction they had unleashed, humans did not know what came next. The fleets that had stood against them were broken, but not every survivor was gone. Pockets of resistance remained, and whispers of vengeance would surely follow. Humanity had ended the war, but the peace that followed would not be simple. Trust was shattered, fear was everywhere, and in the shadow of their victory humanity had inherited a galaxy that no longer knew balance. Among the crews stories spread quickly. Some remembered the moment the antimatter detonations tore through the enemy lines, how the sky turned white and then black, how the void itself seemed to scream. Others remembered the silence just before, when they had thought they were doomed, surrounded by overwhelming fleets, only to witness the enemy crumble in fire. These stories became more than memories, they were warnings, lessons carved in blood and light. On Earth, when the news reached home, people wept. Not for joy but for release. Families clutched one another as transmissions showed the scarred faces of those who had survived. Children listened to their parents whisper that humanity had stood alone and endured, that no empire had survived first contact with the antimatter fleet. It was a truth both terrifying and proud. Terrifying because the galaxy now knew the price of underestimating humankind. Proud because humanity had defended its existence against forces that had believed them weak and disposable. But in the halls of leadership, celebration was muted. They knew what the world would now face. Humanity had revealed its hand, the full might of antimatter weapons. There was no going back. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, and while no empire had survived the first clash, others, hidden, waiting, perhaps watching, would learn from this. The war was over, but survival was not guaranteed. The leaders carried the burden of that knowledge, knowing they had to guide their people into a future where fear and suspicion would define the stars. Amid all of this, the soldiers of the fleet were not forgotten. They were called heroes, saviors, protectors of humanity's future. Yet most of them only thought of the friends they had lost. For every ship that limped home, another had been destroyed. For every voice on the comm, another had gone silent forever. The war had been won, but its price would echo in nightmares and empty chairs. And that truth, too, was carried forward into humanity's story. Still, the ending was not without light. Out of the ashes of war, survivors from other species reached out, not with threats but with trembling voices, asking for peace, for protection, for a place in the new galaxy humanity had forged. For the first time in generations, the balance of power was not tilted toward those who oppressed, enslaved, or dominated. Instead, it rested with a species that had clawed its way from the dirt of a single world, who had bled for every inch of sky, who had refused to bow even when the galaxy demanded it. Humanity was feared, yes, but they were also respected, perhaps even trusted by those who had seen what they were truly fighting for. Not conquest but survival. And so the story closed not with the fire of destruction, but with the faint glimmer of hope. Humanity had become the axis on which the galaxy turned, and though the scars of war ran deep, there was a chance now to build something greater than any empire. A chance to create peace not from fear but from understanding. The fleet slowly returned home, their long journeys across the stars ending at last. As the ships descended toward Earth, battered and broken but still flying, the people below lifted their eyes to the sky. They did not cheer. They did not shout. They stood in silence, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their defenders return. The message was simple, carried in every heart. Humanity had endured, humanity had fought, and humanity had won. But the final twist came not in fire or battle, but in a single realization whispered through the ranks of leadership and crew alike. The Antimatter fleet, so decisive, so unstoppable, had been built only because humanity had been pushed to the edge. If the galaxy had not forced their hand, if the war had not demanded everything, those ships would never have been made. Humanity had never wanted to wield such power, they had been driven to it. And now the galaxy knew. They had shown their strength but also their resolve. They would not strike first. They would not seek domination. But if threatened again, if pushed to the edge once more, the galaxy understood what would come. No empire had survived the first contact. None would survive the next. The story ended there, balanced between dread and hope. Humanity's war was over, but the future stretched wide before them, uncertain and vast. They carried scars but also strength. They had revealed a truth no one could ignore. Humankind was here to stay, and no power in the galaxy would ever erase them. In the quiet after the storm, the lesson was clear. War had taken everything, but it had also revealed something unshakable. Humanity's greatest weapon was not just the antimatter that shattered empires, it was the will to survive, the unbreakable spirit that no fire could consume. And in that spirit lay the future of the galaxy, waiting to be written by those who had fought, endured, and refused to fall. That was how it ended. Not with silence, not with despair, but with the simple truth that humanity had endured the war and stood stronger than ever. And in the dark stretch of space, where stars still burned and ruins still drifted, the galaxy whispered a single truth it would never forget. No empire survived first contact with humanity's antimatter fleet. The war was over, but silence did not come easily. For weeks the stars felt different, heavier somehow, as if the void itself carried the memory of what had been unleashed. Humanity's antimatter fleet had not just won a war. It had reshaped the galaxy. No empire had survived that first contact and none would forget it. In the aftermath, survivors drifted through broken systems, their ships little more than shadows of once proud empires. Some begged for peace, some cursed humanity, and some simply vanished into the dark. Yet humans did not celebrate their victory. The cost had been too great. Lives were lost, and even the strongest among them felt the weight of what they had done. On Earth, people wept as fleets returned scarred and battered. Families gathered in the silence of homes, clutching photos of those who would never return. The glory of victory could not erase the grief. Soldiers who had fired antimatter rounds into enemy fleets stared at their own reflections, wondering if they had gone too far. But beneath the sorrow was something unshakable. Humanity had proved what no other species had dared to believe, that survival was not about size, strength, or numbers but about will. Against impossible odds they had stood together. Against empires that had ruled for centuries, they had refused to bow. That truth echoed louder than any victory speech. And yet, in the ruins of the fallen empires, strange signals began to flicker. Broken worlds still sent out faint transmissions. Unknown voices whispered through damaged relays. Some wondered if remnants of the old powers were plotting in the shadows. Others feared something worse, that the galaxy had only just begun to notice humanity, and that even greater forces might be watching. Still, humans did not falter. They rebuilt their ships, buried their dead, and promised each other that they would never forget what it took to win. The antimatter fleet was no longer just a weapon. It had become a warning written across the stars. Humanity bows to no one. The final lesson of the war was not about destruction but about choice. Every empire that had sought to dominate had been broken, while humanity, in its fragile unity, had endured. The stars were vast, filled with dangers yet unseen, But humans had discovered their greatest strength was not technology, not antimatter, but each other. The fleets moved outward again, not in conquest but in vigilance. New colonies rose in the silence left behind, their lights burning as symbols of life's persistence. And though whispers of unrest remained, one truth held firm across every human heart: whatever waited in the darkness of the galaxy, humanity would face it together. Because in the end, that was the story of the war. Not of empires that fell, not of fleets turned to dust, but of a single species that refused to break. And as long as humans carried that fire, no empire would ever survive their first contact again. The war had ended, but the silence afterward was louder than the battle itself. The stars looked the same, yet everyone who had lived through it knew they were not. Something had changed forever. Humanity had revealed its strength, and the galaxy would never forget. Fleets drifted home, not in triumph but in exhaustion. Soldiers who once roared in defiance now sat quietly, staring out at the black void, haunted by what they had seen. Families on Earth embraced returning loved ones, but too many waited for ships that would never arrive. Victory had come, but its cost left scars deeper than any wound. Across the galaxy, ruins still glowed where empires had fallen. Their arrogance had been shattered, their fleets scattered like dust. Some survivors begged for mercy, others swore revenge, but none could deny the truth: humanity had done the impossible. They had stood against the old order and they had broken it. And yet, humans did not celebrate like conquerors. They mourned. They remembered. They carried both pride and guilt in equal measure. Because survival had demanded something terrible, something they could never take back. The antimatter fleet had not only destroyed ships, it had torn apart centuries of power. But out of that destruction came something stronger than fear: a new understanding. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its ships or its technology. It had been the bond that kept them together. When everything seemed lost, they had refused to break. That was why they had won. Still, whispers traveled through the stars. Signals flickered from dying outposts, carrying voices no one could fully understand. Were they remnants of the old empires, plotting in the shadows? Or were they something new, something far greater than anyone had faced before? The thought lingered, heavy and unspoken. But humanity did not tremble. They had faced extinction once and they had endured. They rebuilt their fleets not for conquest but for survival. They spread outward, lighting new colonies in the darkness, each one a reminder that life would not be silenced. Children grew up hearing the story of the war, not as a tale of destruction, but as proof of what humans could do when they stood together. The lesson was clear. No matter what waited in the endless galaxy, humanity would face it side by side. And in that unity there was something eternal. Empires could rise and fall. Stars could burn out. But the fire in the human heart, the will to fight, to hope, to endure, that was something no force could ever destroy. So the war ended not with a roar but with a vow. A promise carried across every world and every soul: humanity bows to no one. Not then. Not now. Not ever.